I stopped breathing when the wall gave my secret back to me, framed, lit, and smiling like it never knew me before. I had avoided galleries for years, but that night my feet betrayed me, carrying me into glass and marble. The air smelled expensive and quiet. Then I saw it, hanging confidently, waiting, under lights that felt like judgment. Bright, surgical, unforgiving. They exposed everything I hid inside me. Every brushstroke hit me like memory returning. The shadow work, the crooked corner I never fixed, the quiet rage beneath the color. My hands shook because no one else could have painted that pain. It was my voice, louder than I remembered. Older, wounded, but unmistakably mine. Breathing through canvas and time. Blast there. I stood too close, ignoring the small plaque, afraid it would disappear if I blinked. A man in a tailored suit approached, polite smile ready. I heard myself say, calmly, almost politely, that I had painted it 16 years ago. His eyebrows lifted like curtains. People nearby pretended not to listen. My heart kept knocking, waiting for recognition. Or mercy. He laughed softly, indulgent, the way adults laugh at children inventing stories. "That's impossible," he said, without malice, without curiosity. The room tilted. Impossible meant erased. Impossible meant my life before this moment had no witness. I swallowed humiliation and nodded, as if I had merely misunderstood the language of walls. Heat climbed my neck and ears. Felt small again, like home taught me. Quiet, obedient, replaceable, unseen. Will. I asked where the artist was now. He gestured vaguely, success implied, names I recognized from magazines. He spoke of auctions, collectors, acclaim. Each word tightened around my ribs. I kept staring at the paint surface, noticing a correction I remembered making at dawn after crying. My fingerprint lived there, invisible, faithful, while another name took bows. Lights hummed overhead like witnesses. Footsteps echoed, distant and accusing. I tasted metal and dust. Memory pressed harder, refusing to fade. With me. Then I saw the signature. Bold. Confident. Wong. It wasn't a stranger's name. It was familiar, intimate. Someone who once held my meals, my mail, my trust. My chest hollowed. This wasn't theft by chance. It was inheritance by silence. I stepped back, dizzy, realizing the wall wasn't forgetting me. It was protecting someone else. The frame felt like a door. Behind it my past waited. And someone guarded it. Smiling. Prepared. For my silence. 16 years long. Exactly. I left the gallery without looking back. The city colder than before. Traffic blurred into streaks, like wet paint dragged too fast. I pressed my palms together, grounding myself, because anger was rising where grief once lived. Someone else was living my life loudly. And I had been living small, obedient, buried, exactly as planned. My breath came shallow. I promised nothing out loud. But something answered inside. A slow, dangerous certainty. This was not over. Not for me. Home sleep refused me. The painting hovered behind my eyelids. Accusing, familiar. I poured water, spilled it, laughed once at the sound. 16 years ago I stopped painting to survive. Tonight survival felt like cowardice. I knew the next step would hurt someone. I just didn't know how many or how deeply. The ceiling watched silently. Dark, patient, unjudging. My hands twitched, remembering. Paint. Truth. Fire. I wasn't done yet. Not after being erased. Not again. Never again. Ever. I lay there until morning, understanding something brutal and clear. If my name was on that wall in someone else's handwriting, then my silence had signed it too. I had a choice now. Remain impossible, or make remembering very uncomfortable for everyone involved. The thought steadied me. Fear curled but didn't win. Closed my eyes, and saw the wall again, waiting, daring me to speak at last. Tomorrow, maybe. Because the wall had spoken. And I was done pretending I hadn't heard it. I rolled onto my side, heart racing. The signature burned behind my eyes. Tomorrow I would ask who sold my voice. and why they thought I'd stay silent. They were wrong. Very, very wrong. The wall would listen. This time. Finally. I used to believe memory was soft. I was wrong, it cuts deeper than truth. 16 years ago, before galleries and stolen names, I lived in a small house that always felt one argument away from collapse. The walls were thin, the ceiling stained, the silence heavy. I painted in the corner of the living room because it was the only place no one wanted to sit. Cheap paints, second-hand brushes, dreams I never said out loud. Back then my family called it a phase. Let her paint, they said, smiling like generosity cost them nothing. But every smile had a deadline. My marriage was already suffocating. Love had been replaced by numbers, bills, expectations. Art doesn't pay rent, he'd say, not cruelly, worse, dismissively. I learned to paint quietly, carefully, as if joy itself needed permission. That painting came from exhaustion, from nights of swallowing words, from the way I felt myself shrinking in that house. I remember the canvas leaning against the wall, blank and patient, like it knew I'd eventually confess everything to it. I painted after midnight, when the house slept and judgment rested. The room smelled of turpentine and instant coffee. Streetlight filtered through the curtain, giving the colors a bruised glow. My hands moved faster than my thoughts. I didn't plan it. I never did. The figure emerged on its own. Wounded, defiant, impossible to ignore. I layered shadows where anger lived, light where hope refused to die. When the final stroke landed, I stepped back and cried without sound. It felt finished, complete, honest. For the first time in years I believed something might change. I imagined a small exhibition. A conversation where someone asked my name and meant it. I imagined breathing without apology. I leaned the painting against the wall in the spare room, the one I used like a sanctuary. I remember touching the corner gently, as if saying good night. I went to bed smiling. That matters. I hadn't smiled in a long time. Morning came too fast. I woke to the sound of the house moving. Doors, footsteps, life continuing without me. Sunlight hit the wrong wall. My stomach tightened before my feet touched the floor. I walked to the spare room, still half dreaming, still hopeful. The wall was empty. At first I thought I'd leaned it somewhere else. I checked behind the door. A closet. I stood still, listening to my own breathing turn uneven. The room looked violated, like it had been searched for something valuable. Dust where the canvas had rested. Clean rectangle on the wall. I walked into the kitchen slowly. "Have you seen my painting?" I asked, forcing calm. He didn't look up. "What painting?" The lie came too easily. My heart dropped, but I kept going. "The one I finished last night. The big one." Was too long. "Oh, that," he said. "We need to talk about that later." Later is where truth goes to disappear. I asked again. Louder. He sighed, annoyed now. "It's just a painting," he said. "Don't start." That was the moment something broke quietly inside me. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a thin crack running through belief. I searched the house like a fool, hoping reality would change its mind. Didn't. By afternoon, explanations started shifting. It wasn't safe here. Someone might have damaged it. I was protecting you. Protecting me from what? Myself. I noticed how carefully everyone avoided eye contact. How conversations ended when I entered the room. How quickly the subject changed. I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision. Made without me. About me. That night, I sat on the bed staring at my hands. Paint still under my nails. Evidence of something stolen too easily. I felt foolish for believing support had ever been real. Love doesn't steal quietly. Control does. And then it hit me, cold, precise, undeniable. Only one person had the key to that room. Only one person knew what that painting was worth before anyone else did. I lay back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me. Somewhere nearby, my painting was already becoming someone else's story. And I was still here, convincing myself not to scream. 16 years ago I didn't fight. Folded. I stayed quiet. I survived. Tonight, remembering it, I finally understand something terrifying. That silence wasn't accidental. It was taught. And whoever took that painting knew exactly what they were doing, because they knew I wouldn't stop them. Back then. But now. Now I know where to look first. Art didn't scare them until they realized it could speak louder than they could control. After the painting vanished, something shifted in the house. Not silence, tension. Thick, watchful. Every movement felt monitored, every breath measured. My spouse no longer pretended patience. Resentment sharpened his voice, gave it purpose. He looked at me like I had betrayed him by creating something worth taking. "You're obsessed," he said one night, counting bills at the table. "Obsessed with surviving," I replied. "Surviving doesn't come from paint," he snapped. The words landed like a verdict. Art in his mouth became an enemy. Something irresponsible. Dangerous. A luxury we couldn't afford. As if dreams had invoices. He began listing sacrifices he'd made for me, for us. My silence became his proof of victory. A few days later, a family member came by. Usual. Smiling. They always smiled when something ugly was about to be suggested. They admired the house, the routine, the way I'd settled. Then they mentioned my painting, as if remembering it late. "You know," they said gently, "you could sell your work for a while. Just until things stabilize. Sell it. Temporarily." I laughed at first. I thought it was a joke dressed as concern. "No," I said. "That painting isn't for sale." They tilted their heads, studying me. "You're being emotional." That word again. Emotional. The polite way to say unreasonable. Difficult. Replaceable. I refused again. Firmer. Louder. I said my art wasn't inventory. It wasn't a backup plan. It was mine. The room cooled instantly. Smiles retreated. Concern hardened into irritation. They exchanged a look I wasn't meant to catch. That's when arguments stopped being conversations. "You think you're special," my spouse said later that night. "You think this is going to save you." I said nothing. I didn't trust my voice anymore. He began coming home later. Conversations ended abruptly when I entered rooms. I felt like a guest in my own life. They spoke around me, over me, as if I were furniture they planned to move soon. My art supplies were suddenly in the way. My time was questioned. My confidence chipped away carefully. One evening, after another fight about money, he said it plainly. "Your painting is causing problems." I stared at him. "My painting didn't argue with you," I said. "I'm not talking about the painting," he replied. That was the moment I understood. It wasn't about bills. It was about control. As long as my art existed, so did a version of me that didn't belong entirely to them. That version had to be erased. The painting disappeared again that week. This time without mystery. Without panic. Just absence. I didn't ask where it went. I already knew the answer would be layered with lies and concern and warnings about my tone. Instead, I was told to forget it. "Let it go," they said. "It was never practical," they said. "You're holding on to things that hurt you," they said. As if it was the painting that hurt me. They spoke about it like it had never existed. Like I was imagining it. Gaslighting wrapped in family language. Love used as pressure. I began questioning my own memory. My own worth. I started believing that maybe art was childish. Dangerous. A mistake. My voice softened. Then it disappeared. At dinners, I nodded instead of speaking. At gatherings, I smiled and said I was fine. Packed away my brushes. I stopped buying paint. I told myself this was maturity. Compromise. Survival. Every day I shrank a little more. Inside something screamed. But I trained myself not to listen. That's how threats work. They don't announce themselves. They convince you to cooperate. My art had become a liability, so I buried it. And with it, the part of me that still believed I could be seen without permission. Years later, standing in that gallery, I finally understood the cruelty of that week. The painting didn't just disappear. It was removed deliberately, because it represented freedom they couldn't manage. They didn't just take my work. They took my right to remember myself. And when I asked for it back, they told me to forget, because forgetting kept them safe. But I remember now. Every word, every look, every warning disguised as love. And if art was a threat then, it's because truth always is. The next chapter of my life begins where fear started. And someone is about to learn what happens when a voice returns after 16 years of silence. The name on the canvas hit harder than the theft itself. I stepped closer until the guard shifted his weight, watching me like grief might become a crime. The signature sat in the corner, confident and clean, written with a hand that had never trembled while creating it. I traced the letters with my eyes, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. I knew that name, not personally but familiarly. It belonged to a rising artist everyone suddenly admired. Interviews, awards, articles calling him fearlessly original. I had read those words years ago with a strange ache, never knowing why my chest tightened every time his work appeared online. Now I did. It wasn't just my painting. It was my life, translated into someone else's success. The gallery owner joined me again, mistaking my silence for awe. He began explaining things with pride like a tour guide showing off history. He talked about the painting's value, how it had tripled in price since its first showing, how collectors fought over it quietly, respectfully, like sharks with manners. This piece, he said, changed everything for him. I swallowed. For him, I repeated. He nodded, unaware, gesturing toward the canvas. He spoke about the first exhibition, the way critics leaned in, the way the room had gone quiet. I remembered that room. In my head. The one I'd imagined. The one I never stood in. Hearing it described felt like watching footage of a life I should have lived. It's considered a cornerstone of his early work, the gallery owner continued. Early, I whispered. Each detail landed like a bruise. Locations. Cities I had never visited because I couldn't afford to dream that big. He spoke of provenance, of authenticity, of how rare it was to find a piece so emotionally raw. I wanted to scream. Raw emotion was easy when it was stolen. I stared at the brushwork again, noticing the flaws I'd left intentionally. The hesitation in the background. The place where I almost gave up. Those weren't techniques. They were confessions. He was selling my confessions. I asked, quietly, carefully, as if volume might shatter something fragile. Where did he get it? The gallery owner hesitated for the first time. He cleared his throat, checking the room like the answer might echo too loudly. It came through a private collector, he said. Years ago. Private collector. The phrase settled heavy. Private meant hidden. Meant unchallenged. Meant transactions done without witnesses. My heart began to beat faster, louder than the gallery's polished silence. I felt 16 years collapse into this single moment, pressing against my ribs. Who? Asked. He smiled politely, professionally. I'm afraid I can't disclose names. I nodded like I understood. Like this wasn't unraveling me thread by thread. I asked another question instead, softer. Was the collector local? Yes, he said. Very. My throat tightened. Local meant close. Familiar. It meant the house with thin walls. The spare room. The family dinners. The smiles that had come with conditions. The word private suddenly felt intimate in the worst way. He continued talking, unaware that my world was rearranging itself. He mentioned paperwork, old sales records, sealed agreements. He said everything was legal, documented, clean. I wondered whose signature sat on those documents. I wondered how many times my silence had been used as permission. I felt exposed standing there like the painting could hear me thinking. The lights seemed harsher now. The room colder. People drifted past, admiring something that had once saved me from breaking. They had no idea they were standing inside my confession. I stepped back again, afraid I might reach out and touch it. afraid I'd leave fingerprints where they didn't belong anymore. The canvas no longer needed me. Had a new story. Profitable one. The gallery owner asked if I was all right. "I'm fine," I said automatically. The lie slid out easily. I'd practiced for years. But inside something was sharpening. The theft was no longer abstract. Had a route. Handoff. Paper trail. Someone had taken my work and delivered it carefully into another life. Someone I trusted enough not to guard against. As I turned to leave, the gallery owner added one last detail, casually, almost kindly. "The collector had strong family ties," he said. "That's how these things often happen." Family. The word echoed long after I stepped outside. The city noise rushed back in, overwhelming and alive. Cars passed. People laughed. The world moved forward, unconcerned with my revelation. I stood on the sidewalk, breathing in exhaust and truth. The private collector wasn't a stranger. They never are. They're people who know your habits, your weaknesses, your silence. I finally understood why the painting had disappeared so easily. Why no one panicked. Why I was told to forget. Because it wasn't stolen in the night. It was handed over in daylight, by someone who knew exactly what it was worth. And now I knew where to start looking. The name on the canvas wasn't the only one that mattered anymore. The funeral came back to me like a bruise I never pressed on until now. I was standing at a red light after leaving the gallery when the memory surfaced, sharp and uninvited. The day we buried a family elder. The day everyone wore black and spoke softly, as if grief required good manners. I hadn't thought about that week in years. Till now. Back then I was barely holding myself together. The painting had already vanished. My marriage was unraveling quietly. Grief layered on top of exhaustion until everything felt heavy and slow. I remember sitting on a stiff couch, hands folded, listening to conversations drift over my head like smoke. They talked about arrangements, about paperwork, about assets. Someone mentioned a will. Someone else said it had already been handled. I remember thinking it was strange how quickly everything moved. How grief was given a schedule. How signatures appeared where tears should have been. "It's all taken care of," they told me. "You don't need to worry about it." I believed them. I always did. There were items listed quietly, efficiently. Property. Counts. Personal belongings. That phrase meant nothing to me then. I didn't realize art could fit inside it so easily. That creativity could be categorized, boxed, transferred without ceremony. I remember asking vaguely if anything had been found in the house that wasn't listed. My voice sounded distant, even to me. "No," someone said quickly. Too quickly. "Everything's accounted for." Grief makes you pliable. Softens your edges. It teaches you to accept answers you would normally question just to survive the day. He nodded. Sat back. I let it go. Now, standing years later with the gallery's words echoing in my chest, I replay that moment differently. I see the exchanged looks. The way papers were slid across tables. The way my presence was acknowledged but never centered. I wasn't part of the inheritance conversation. I was part of the background. Inheritance, I've learned, isn't always money. Sometimes it's opportunity passed quietly to the person who knows how to exploit it. Sometimes it's control disguised as responsibility. Sometimes it's deciding who gets remembered and who gets erased. I thought inheritance was about love. About honoring someone's life. I was naive. The painting wasn't just stolen from me. It was redistributed, reassigned, treated like a silent asset waiting for the right moment. While I was grieving, while I was doubting myself, while I was being told to let things go. I imagine the conversation now, years too late. She won't notice. She's emotional right now. It's better this way. Better for whom? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. The timing was too perfect. The disappearance. The death. Paperwork. The sudden appearance of my work in someone else's hands. This wasn't chaos. It was planning. I had been powerless, Not because I lacked strength, but because no one told me I needed it. I felt sick realizing how neatly everything fit together. How my silence had value. How my trust had been used as currency. They didn't need my permission. They needed my absence. Blood doesn't always protect you. Sometimes it's the sharpest blade. I sat in my car long after the light turned green, watching other lives move forward. People honked. Someone shouted. The world demanded motion. I stayed still, finally understanding the depth of the betrayal. My art had been treated like property. Like something that could be moved without my consent because I was deemed incapable of claiming it. They decided grief made me unqualified. They decided silence meant surrender. I wondered who signed the papers. Who nodded approvingly. Who justified it by saying they were helping the family. Helping themselves. The thought that my own blood may have sold my soul settled heavy and cold inside me. Not metaphorically. Practically. Legally. Carefully. That realization hurt more than the theft itself. Because stranger stealing is expected. Family stealing requires rehearsal. Planning. Agreement. I drove home with my hands tight on the wheel. Seeing every memory differently now. Every kindness re-examined. Every smile questioned. The past rearranged itself without asking my permission. By the time I parked, one truth was unavoidable. The painting didn't disappear because no one valued it. It disappeared because too many people did. And someone I loved decided its worth mattered more than I did. That night I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat very still and accepted something I'd avoided for 16 years. If inheritance was the battlefield, then I had been the offering. And the war wasn't over yet. Silence didn't just erase me, it sponsored someone else. That realization hit me at 3 a.m, laptop glow burning my eyes, coffee gone cold beside me. I couldn't sleep after what I'd understood about inheritance. My mind needed facts. Proof that memory wasn't lying to me again. I started with his name. The celebrated artist. The one on my canvas. Articles flooded the screen. Interviews, profiles, praise stacked neatly like trophies. I scrolled faster, heart pounding, watching his career bloom in real time. Then I slowed down. I looked at dates. Carefully. Methodically. Like someone afraid of what they'd find. His first exhibition was 16 years ago. The same year I stopped painting. I felt my chest tighten as I opened another tab. An old gallery flyer surfaced online, archived but intact. His debut piece stared back at me. My painting reframed, retitled, reborn. The description spoke of a raw voice emerging suddenly, fully formed. Suddenly. I laughed once, sharp and bitter. Nothing about that work was sudden. It was built from years of struggle, failure, and quiet resilience. From nights I painted while everyone slept. From days I pretended I didn't care. He didn't emerge. He arrived, carrying something already finished. I dug deeper. Social media posts from years back. Grainy photos of early exhibitions. I zoomed in, my fingers trembling. There it was again. The same background. The same crooked shadow I never corrected. Different signature. Soul. I whispered to the empty room. That's mine. No one answered. But the truth did. The timeline was perfect. Too perfect. As my presence disappeared, his expanded. While I packed away brushes, he unpacked accolades. While I was told to focus on family, he focused on galleries. While I learned silence, he learned applause. I remembered the conversations I'd buried. Maybe you should take a break, they'd said. For the family's peace. Just until things settle. Settle where? Into whose hands? I remembered agreeing, exhausted, wanting the arguments to stop. Wanting to be seen as reasonable. I told myself it was temporary. That I'd return when things were calmer. But calm never came. Control did. I clicked through more records, my breathing shallow now. Grants. Sponsorships. A mention of a private benefactor early in his career. Anonymous. Family funded, maybe. The words blurred, but the meaning sharpened. Someone invested in him. With my work. I slammed the laptop shut, then opened it again, needing more. I searched for exhibitions I'd once applied to, long forgotten. Rejection emails sat in my archive like ghosts. Dates overlapped with his acceptance letters published proudly online. I hadn't failed. I had been replaced. A memory surfaced, a family gathering years ago, someone casually mentioning his name. "He's doing so well," they'd said. I'd smiled politely, feeling inexplicably small. Now I knew why. My silence had value. It bought credibility. It allowed a clean origin story. No competing voice. No inconvenient creator asking questions. Silence let the lie grow uninterrupted. I felt nauseous realizing how cooperative I'd been. I was told to stop painting for peace. And peace, it turns out, was expensive. Someone paid for it with my future. With my work. With my name. I opened a folder I hadn't touched in years. Old backups from an ancient hard drive. Sketches. Progress shots. Time-stamped images I'd taken without thinking. I scrolled, heart racing. There it was. An early draft of the painting. My handwriting in the margin. Date. I stared at it for a long time. This wasn't memory. This was evidence. My hands shook as I opened another file. A photo of the painting leaning against my wall, unfinished, light from the same window I remembered. The timestamp burned into the corner of the screen. Earlier than his debut. Earlier than his claim. I covered my mouth, tears finally coming. Not from sadness but from clarity. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined it. My life hadn't dissolved into nothing. It had been absorbed. My phone buzzed with a message from a family member. Casual, harmless on the surface. "Just checking in. Haven't heard from you." I stared at the screen, suddenly aware of how dangerous this knowledge was. Proof doesn't just expose lies. It detonates relationships, careers, reputations built carefully on someone else's silence. I closed the folder slowly, my heart pounding like I'd stolen something back. 'Cause I had proof now. Real proof. Enough to ask questions no one wanted asked. Enough to threaten more than one carefully constructed life. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, understanding the weight of what I held. If I spoke, someone would fall. Maybe several someones. And once truth starts moving, it doesn't stop where you want it to. I wiped my face, steadied my breathing, and whispered into the dark. "Now what?" The answer didn't come gently. It came with fear, clarity, and a single terrifying truth. Silence had built a career. And breaking it might destroy a family. I wasn't supposed to come back with questions. I was supposed to stay quiet forever. I chose the family member carefully. Not the loudest. Not the cruelest. The one who always claimed to be neutral. The one who just wanted peace. I told myself I'd keep it casual, light, almost nostalgic. As if I were asking about an old photograph, not a stolen life. We met in a familiar place. Public. Daylight. I needed witnesses, even if they didn't know what they were witnessing. The room smelled like coffee and old comfort. I watched their face when they saw me sit down. The flicker was brief, but it was there. Surprise first. Then calculation. "How have you been?" they asked too quickly. "I'm okay," I said. "I went to a gallery recently." That was all it took. Their fingers tightened around the cup. Not much, just enough. Their smile stayed in place, but their eyes sharpened, like I'd stepped somewhere I wasn't allowed. I talked slowly, deliberately, mentioning the painting. Not accusing. Not yet. "I saw something familiar," I said. Their jaw locked. "I didn't know you still thought about that," they replied. "Why wouldn't I?" asked. That's when panic arrived, dressed as irritation. "You're reopening old wounds," they snapped. "I'm asking a question. You're rewriting history." The words came fast after that. Too fast. Jealousy. Confusion. Stress. They said I'd always struggled with letting go. That I'd imagined things before. That I was doing it again. Gaslighting polished by years of practice. "You walked away," they said. "I was pushed," I answered quietly. They leaned back, crossing their arms, voice rising. So now you want to destroy someone else's success? I want the truth. Their laugh was sharp, humorless. This again, they said. You need to stop. The same word from 16 years ago. The same command, delivered with the same certainty. Used to work. It used to fold me in half. This time it didn't. I watched their eyes instead of listening. That's where the truth lived. Every time I mentioned dates, their gaze flickered away. Every time I mentioned the painting's early drafts, their breathing changed. Anger was the performance. Fear was the reality. You're jealous, they said again. No, I replied. I'm late. That stopped them. For a moment the mask slipped. Just a crack. Enough for me to see what lived underneath. They hadn't expected this version of me. Calm, prepared, unafraid of discomfort. They'd built their certainty on my absence, on my silence, on the version of me that swallowed injustice and called it peace. You should be careful, they warned, lowering their voice. About what? About accusing people. About embarrassing yourself. There it was. Not concern. Not love. Fear of exposure. I leaned forward, heart pounding but steady. I didn't accuse anyone, I said. I asked where my painting went. Their face hardened. You were never going to do anything with it anyway. That sentence told me everything. I felt something cold and clear settle in my chest. They didn't see theft. They saw reassignment. They believed potential unused was potential forfeited. They believed silence was consent. They believed I was still the person who would accept that. I was grieving, I said. We were all grieving, they replied too quickly. But their eyes betrayed them. They weren't grieving then. They were strategizing. And now they were afraid. Not of justice but of disruption. Afraid that the careful story they'd rehearsed for years was about to be interrupted by its original author. They stood up abruptly, chair scraping loud enough to turn heads. This conversation is over, they said. It started a long time ago, I answered. They walked away without looking back. I stayed seated, hands trembling slightly, adrenaline buzzing through me. People around me returned to their lives, unaware that something irreversible had just shifted. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't accused. I hadn't even revealed what I knew. And still they ran. On the walk home, the realization hit me with a strange calm. They weren't angry because I was wrong. They were angry because I wasn't supposed to remember. I wasn't supposed to question. I wasn't supposed to survive long enough to matter again. They thought I was broken forever. Invisible. That's why they'd been careless. Why lies went unchallenged. Why my art could be passed hand to hand like an object without resistance. They built their safety on the assumption that I would never come back with clarity. But I had. And the most unsettling part wasn't what they'd done. It was what I finally understood as I replayed the conversation in my head. They were more afraid than I was. Afraid of timelines. Afraid of documents. Afraid of a voice that no longer shook. Afraid of the truth standing upright, refusing to apologize. By the time I reached my door, my fear had changed shape. It wasn't paralyzing anymore. It was focused, purposeful, dangerous in a quiet way. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, knowing something fundamental had shifted. They knew I was back. And now they would start protecting themselves. Which meant the truth was closer than ever. The sketchbook was heavier than I remembered. Not with weight but with memory. I found it buried at the back of a closet, behind boxes I hadn't touched in years. Dust coated the cover. The leather smelled faintly of mold and old ink, like it had been waiting, patient and silent, for me to return. My fingers trembled as I lifted it. Every creak of the binding echoed through the empty apartment, like footsteps I hadn't taken in 16 years. I opened the first page. Pencil strokes, rough and hesitant, lined the paper. Dates scribbled in my uneven hand confirmed it. Years before the painting appeared in galleries, before anyone knew my name, I had drawn it. Every draft, every attempt, every discarded angle was inside. I felt a strange mixture of pride and grief. These pages weren't just practice. They were the blueprint of a life someone else had claimed. I flipped carefully, each turn of the page revealing sketches I barely recognized. Lines jagged with doubt. Shadows layered clumsily. Figures staring back, unfinished and questioning. Failures I had long buried became witnesses to my persistence. The early studies of the painting, the one now hanging in the gallery with someone else's signature, were here. Every correction, every erased line, every hesitation screamed my ownership. "This is mine," I whispered, voice trembling, almost afraid to break the silence. I remembered the nights I stayed awake, sketching by candlelight, hiding my work from those who didn't want me to succeed. Each sketch, each note in the margin, was a fragment of courage I had collected when my own voice was silenced. They hadn't forgotten it. They had simply assumed I had forgotten. The thought made my chest tighten. Every time I had been told to stop, every time I had been dismissed, every time my art had been quietly transferred, someone had believed I would never return to claim it. They were wrong. I reached the last few pages. The final sketches were nearly identical to the completed painting, the one in the gallery, except for tiny details. A shadow slightly longer. A figure's gaze marginally different. Subtle variations that only I would notice. I felt a surge of triumph and fury. This wasn't just memory. This was proof. Evidence. My work had never belonged to anyone else. Tears stung my eyes as I traced the lines. 16 years of stolen recognition and silenced potential pressed against me like a tide. Every early version, every failed attempt had survived. Patient, waiting, undeniable. My hands shook as I closed the sketchbook for a moment, breathing deeply. This was my past, my proof, my voice finally tangible again. I ran my fingers over the cover, thinking of the gallery, the place where my painting now hung under another name. I realized I couldn't just observe anymore. Not as a visitor. Not as someone watching their life be celebrated in another's hands. The sketchbook reminded me that I had the right, the reason, and the proof to reclaim it. "This ends differently," I muttered. My voice carried through the empty room, soft but determined. The apartment around me felt alive with potential, shadows stretching like memories. I packed the sketchbook carefully into my bag, protecting it as if it were a weapon or a key. Outside, the city moved on without pause. Cars honked, strangers passed, oblivious to the storm quietly building inside me. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of action replacing the weight of grief. I had survived erasure. I had survived silence. Now, armed with evidence, I could step forward and confront what had been taken. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. My eyes were sharper than they'd been in years. The fire I thought had dimmed was still there, smoldering beneath calm resolve. The sketchbook was proof, yes, but it was also a promise. That the world would see me. That my voice would be heard. That my name would be reclaimed. And I knew where I had to go next. I would return to the gallery. Not as a visitor admiring stolen work. Not as a ghost of a career that had been erased. I would return as the rightful owner of my story. The city lights blurred behind my eyes as I stepped into the night. Heartbeat steady, mind sharp. The sketchbook pressed against my chest. Had been waiting for me. And so had I. The gallery wasn't ready for what I was about to bring. Impossible stopped being a word the moment I placed the sketchbook on his desk. The gallery felt different this time. Quieter. Smaller. Like it sensed why I'd returned. I didn't wander. I didn't look at the walls. I walked straight to the office, my bag heavy against my side, my pulse steady in a way that surprised me. The gallery owner looked up, already smiling, until he saw my face. "You again," he said lightly. "Yes," I replied. "This time I won't be leaving confused." He gestured for me to sit, confidence still intact, professionalism polished. Sunlight poured through the tall window, catching dust in the air. I placed the sketchbook on the desk between us. Gently, deliberately, like evidence in a trial. "What's this?" he asked. "My voice," I said. "Before it was stolen." He opened it out of courtesy, then slowed. Pages turned. His posture changed almost immediately. The casual lean disappeared. He sat up straighter, eyes narrowing, reading dates, studying lines, following progressions he couldn't ignore. "This is..." He stopped himself. "Earlier," I finished. "Much earlier." I pointed to a page marked with a date, my handwriting unmistakable. Then another. And another. Draft. Corrections. Notes to myself written in exhaustion and hope. He flipped faster now, breath shallow, confidence draining like color from a photograph left too long in the sun. "I've never seen this," he said quietly. "No," I answered. "You weren't supposed to." The room seemed to hold its breath. Outside I could hear footsteps, faint voices, life continuing without permission. Inside something fragile cracked open. He cleared his throat. "The artist told us a different story." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm here." He leaned back, rubbing his jaw. The certainty he'd worn so comfortably before was gone. In its place was discomfort. The kind that doesn't ask politely before settling in. "I always thought the timeline was unusual," he admitted. I stayed silent. He spoke again, slower now. "The work arrived fully formed. No early pieces. No progression. That's rare." "It's not rare," I said. "It's stolen." He didn't argue. That mattered more than anything else. He studied the sketchbook again, lingering on a page where the painting was nearly complete, the date written boldly at the bottom. Earlier than any document he'd shown me before. Earlier than the artist's first claim. "This changes things," he said. "For me, it changes everything," I replied. He looked up, really looked at me this time. Not as a nuisance. Not as an emotional visitor. As a creator. Person. A problem he couldn't dismiss. "Why now?" he asked. "Why come back after all these years?" I exhaled slowly. "Because I finally stopped protecting the people who didn't protect me." That answer landed harder than I expected. His eyes softened just slightly. He closed the sketchbook carefully, as if it were fragile. "I'm sorry," he said, and this time it wasn't professional politeness. It was human. "The story we were given never fully made sense. But the market doesn't ask too many questions when success looks clean." He nodded. "It never does." He hesitated, then added, "The collector, they were insistent. Family connected. Trusted. Family." Again. The word felt heavier now, no longer abstract. Had a cost. Shape. Consequence. I imagined faces I'd grown up with. Voices that once told me they wanted peace. I imagined them learning I'd spoken. That I'd brought proof into a room they thought was sealed forever. My stomach tightened. "If this moves forward," he said carefully, "there will be questions. Public ones. I know. Reputations could be damaged." "Yes. Yours too," he added. I smiled faintly. "Mine already was." Silence stretched between us, thick but not hostile. For the first time since this began, I felt heard. Not indulged. Not dismissed. Heard. Someone else was finally carrying the weight of truth with me. "I need to consult legal," he said. "Provenance review. Independent verification." "I expected that," I replied. He nodded, then surprised me by saying, "But I believe you." The words hit harder than any accusation. Belief. Simple. Powerful. Dangerous. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I held them back. I wouldn't cry here. Not now. I stood adjusting my bag. "What happens to the painting?" I asked. "For now," he said. "It stays off the floor." That was enough. Temporary justice. Pause in the lie. As I turned to leave, he stopped me. "You should prepare yourself," he said gently. "This won't stay private." I met his gaze. It never was. Outside, the air felt sharper, colder. I walked down the steps slowly. the city stretching wide and indifferent around me. Justice felt close now. Real. Tangible. Within reach. But so did the cost. Exposure doesn't just reveal truth. It burns bridges. Names. It forces people to choose sides they never wanted chosen for them. My family would know soon. They would feel cornered, threatened, betrayed. I paused on the sidewalk, gripping my bag. I had wanted to be seen. I hadn't wanted to be at war. But truth doesn't negotiate. Demands space. As I walked away from the gallery, heart heavy but steady, one thing was clear. Justice was finally listening. And my family was about to hear everything I'd been silent about for 16 years. Whether they were ready or not. They didn't ask how I was doing. They asked what I'd told them. The calls started the next morning. One after another. Missed calls first, then messages stacked with urgency. I knew before answering what this was about. Truth travels faster inside families than love ever does. I agreed to meet. Neutral place. Familiar ground. They needed control and I needed to see their faces. The room filled slowly. No hugs. No warmth. Just tight smiles and restless hands. I felt like I'd interrupted a meeting that had already decided my fate. The air was thick with fear, not concern. "You went to the gallery," someone said, not a question. "Yes," I answered. A sigh rippled through them, collective and rehearsed. One of them leaned forward, voice low, urgent. "Do you understand what you've done?" I almost laughed. Almost. They didn't talk about my pain. They talked about consequences. Lawsuit. Contracts. Defamation. Words sharpened into weapons. They warned me about reputations that could be ruined. Careers dismantled. Families embarrassed. "Why are you doing this now?" someone asked. "Because it's true," I said. They exchanged looks. The same looks I'd seen years ago when decisions were made without me. Fear sat behind their eyes, raw and unmasked. This wasn't about protecting me. It was about protecting themselves. "You're opening old wounds," one of them said. "No," I replied. "You never closed them." They spoke over me then. Voices overlapping. Panic dressed up as logic. They said I didn't understand how serious this was. How powerful the people involved were. How messy it could get. "You could lose everything," they warned. I thought about what everything meant to them. Silence. Compliance. Erasure. I had already lost those things. 16 years ago. One of them reached for my hand, finally attempting tenderness. "We're family," they said. "We're just trying to protect you." I pulled my hand back. "You're trying to protect the lie," I said quietly. That's when the tone changed. "Think about the shame," someone snapped. "Think about what people will say. Do you want to be known as the one who destroyed all of this?" All of this. Their comfort. Their carefully maintained story. Their peace built on my absence. They asked me to stay quiet again. Gently at first. Then firmly. Then desperately. They said I could still walk away. Let it fade. Let the gallery handle it quietly. Let the painting disappear from public view without explanation. "We can make this go away," they promised. I realized then how practiced they were at disappearance. How easily they spoke about erasing things. How often they'd done it before. "Just let it go," they said. For everyone's sake. Everyone never included me. I looked around the room at people who shared my blood but not my courage. I saw the inheritance they'd always planned for me. Not money. Not property. Silence. Silence passed down like tradition. Like duty. Like love twisted into obedience. Felt strangely calm. "I can't," I said. The reaction was immediate. Faces hardened. Voices sharpened. Fear turned into accusation. "You're being selfish. You're ruining lives. You're doing this for attention." I let them speak. I let the words hit and fall away. I had carried worse alone. "I already disappeared once," I said when they finally paused. "It nearly killed me." Silence followed. Real silence. Not the controlled kind. The kind that reveals truth. Someone stood up abruptly. If you go through with this, they said, don't expect support. Support. Another word that had always come with conditions. He nodded. I never had it, I replied. I left before they could say more. Before guilt could find new shapes. Outside, the sky was heavy, clouds pressing low, like the world itself was holding its breath. My hands shook as I walked, adrenaline finally catching up to me. They hadn't begged with love. They'd begged with fear. Fear of exposure. Fear of consequences. Fear of losing what they'd gained by keeping me small. At home, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the sketchbook resting on the table. Proof. Power. Voice. I thought about the painting. About the gallery. About the years I spent convincing myself that silence was strength. It wasn't. Silence was what they inherited from me. And they wanted it back. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Please. Think about this. I closed my eyes, heart pounding. Protect them and disappear again. Or protect myself, and let the truth take its rightful space. 16 years ago the choice was made for me. Tonight it wasn't. I picked up the sketchbook, holding it like a promise and a threat all at once. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened window. Tired. Older. But no longer afraid. I understood something then, with painful clarity. Whatever I chose next would change everything. And this time I would be the one deciding who gets protected. Even if it costs me the family that never protected me at all. The wall was empty, and yet it shouted at me. I arrived at the gallery early, before anyone else. The painting, the one stolen from me 16 years ago, was gone. The frame remained, awkwardly light, nails exposed like broken teeth. A strange silence filled the room. Staff whispered in corners, their eyes flicking toward me as though I might shatter at any moment. But I didn't. I felt the absence, heavy and accusing, and I let it settle. The removal was more than physical. It was symbolic. Every day it had hung there. Someone else's name had claimed my work. Now finally the lie was being undone. And with it, attention turned slowly to me. The gallery owner met me near the empty wall. His expression was a careful mixture of respect and apology. It's been removed, he said quietly. I see that, I replied. And now, questions will follow. I wandered the empty space, tracing the spot where my colors had lived, feeling the layers of my own history pressing through the air. Years of absence, silence, and stolen moments weighed in the light from the high windows. I saw the patterns of past exhibitions, the way visitors had been directed to admire what wasn't mine. The thought made my stomach tighten. Staff came forward, murmuring cautiously, as if approaching an untouchable truth. Everyone is asking, one said. I know, I interrupted gently. They will know soon. And they did. Questions began to surface. Online forums, art magazines, collectors, lawyers. Everyone wanted to know how a piece once celebrated under another's name could disappear so abruptly. The rumor of truth spread like wildfire, licking edges of gossip, igniting curiosity and suspicion. I watched the network of lies begin to unravel before my eyes, each thread pulling others loose. I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. Triumph would come later, slowly, as the world recognized what I already knew. I felt hollow, raw, a mixture of relief and grief. 16 years couldn't be returned. Every missed opportunity, every quiet dismissal, every day I'd spent convincing myself I had failed hung like a shadow. I walked to the gallery office, carrying the sketchbook carefully. The owner nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the gravity of the moment. You did this, he said. Not a question but recognition. Yes, I replied. Finally. Standing in the now empty gallery, I realized the painting's absence left something else in its place. Space. Space for me. Space for my voice, long muffled, now able to speak without apology. I breathed slowly, letting it fill me. I thought of the family who had begged me to stay silent, the colleagues who had doubted me, the artist who claimed my work. None of them had touched this. None of them had ever held the voice that created it. I felt a strange tenderness toward the empty wall. For years it had been the evidence of absence, a reminder of theft, betrayal, and quiet suffering. Now it was a mirror, a space to begin again. Pain. To exist fully, finally visible. The gallery owner whispered. People will ask who it belongs to now. I nodded, almost smiling. It belongs to the one who made it. And I felt something quietly powerful. They stole the painting. They stole recognition. They tried to erase me. But my voice, my creativity, my essence, they could never own that. I placed the sketchbook gently on the counter, as if passing a torch from the past to the present. Every page a witness. Every line a testament. Every date a refusal to be erased. I left the gallery briefly, stepping out into sunlight, feeling the city move around me, indifferent yet alive. Cars honked. People laughed. Strangers brushed past. And I understood that visibility didn't demand acknowledgement. Demanded courage. I had found mine. Returning to the gallery, I faced a blank canvas set up on an easel. My hands itched. My heart pounded with anticipation and fear. The same old tremor that used to accompany every first stroke. Only this time no one could tell me to stop. No one could claim my work as theirs. This canvas waited. Empty, expectant, honest. I held a brush in my hand and felt the years fall away. The past, painful and relentless, was present in my touch, but it no longer controlled me. Every stroke I made whispered freedom, recovery, and quiet defiance. The gallery walls were empty, but my presence filled them. And I finally understood. They stole my art, but they never owned my voice. The first mark on the blank canvas was tentative, a small rebellion, a soft reclaiming. Then another, bolder. And another. Each stroke built upon the last. The gallery was silent, holding its breath with me. For the first time in 16 years, I painted openly, unapologetically, without fear or hesitation. My life's work was no longer a secret, no longer stolen. I glanced at the empty frame on the wall, a reminder of the battle, the theft, and the recovery. A pang of sadness pressed against the triumph, bittersweet but undeniable. I hadn't recovered the years. I hadn't erased the pain. But I had reclaimed something infinitely more important, myself. And as the sunlight fell across the canvas, catching pigment in its glow, I felt a quiet promise settle inside me. I would begin again, fully seen, fully heard, finally free.